Good afternoon or evening or morning, everybody, wherever you are happen to be in this wonderful earth of ours. I'm really pleased to moderate this panel, Online Video Formats 2018 and Beyond. It's a really exciting topic. Obviously, very germane to what we're doing in the online video industry is trying to figure out, how to package up our content and what codec to use and what's coming next. And I've got a really distinguished panel of panelists with me from 4 companies who are enmeshed in the codec space. Now, this webinar is brought to you by the Streaming Video Alliance. I am Jason Thibault, the Executive Director. And the Streaming Video Alliance, if you don't know about us, is a sort of global association of companies across the video ecosystem that have come together to collaborate, create educational materials around the challenges of streaming video, develop specifications, best practices, and sometimes even standards around solving those challenges in delivering online video, and really, focusing on enabling companies to collaborate to make a better experience for end users. So what I want to do is I want to spend a little bit of time with the panelists, allowing them to introduce themselves. So if we can start off with Tom Vaughan from Beamr.
Hey, hello. I'm Tom Vaughan. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Beamr. I've been involved in the video encoder space for quite some time. Before joining Beamr in January, I was the person who started the X265 project and ran that for 5 years.
Fantastic. Torbjorn?
Yeah, so I'm Torbjorn Einarsson. I've also been in the video technology field for more than 20 years. I was leading the Ericsson's research on video coding for quite some time and was among the guys starting up Dash around 10 years ago. And now I'm an expert on video technology at Edgeware, where we do video CDN and repackaging nodes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thierry?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Thierry Faultier, Vice President Video Strategy at Harmonic. Harmonic, as you know, is a leader in the video delivery, and I've been in the video space for too long, part of the MPEG-2, please do not laugh, standard, and now quite concerned about the explosions of the codecs we have in the market. And of course, Harmonic very interested to share our perspective on this topic.
Fantastic. And finally, Valentijn from Unified Streaming Platform.
Yeah, hello, Valentijn Siebrands. I'm a streaming engineer and architect working for Unified Streaming since January. Long experience in broadcast and formerly known as a DJ, radio stuff back in the 90s. But currently, anything related to OTT.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, guys. Hey, listen, again, I'm really excited about all of your perspectives, and you guys bring a ton of experience around codecs and video packaging to the table. And obviously, I think I can probably speak for the audience and, maybe even you guys in saying that right now the codec, market or industry or, establishment is really confusing for a lot of people. There are so many competing codecs and so many competing standards and things that are, really requiring people to have a lot of knowledge, deep knowledge, technical knowledge about how to package video in order to make a decision about what codec they should use going forward. So, let me ask you this question, and it's a very high level question, but, in that confusion, how do companies know which codecs to adopt? I mean, how can they even make a decision about, HEVC versus AV1 versus VP9 or, the list of others that are coming on after that? How can we help companies make a decision?
Who should start?
There you go. You are.
Okay. So this is Tom. I think clearly H.264 AVC is the common denominator. Everyone will support it. It's not a question of whether you will support that codec or not in the video streaming world. The question is when and whether to adopt an advanced codec. And if you do, there are certainly some costs and challenges involved, and certainly there are some benefits you can obtain. So you have to weigh those costs and benefits. You have to really look at the type of customers and type of business you run. If Bandwidth is a serious constraint and a serious cost. Advanced codecs at the cost of some compute can deliver tremendous gains and reductions in bandwidth. If the quality of experience you can deliver is key, advanced codecs can deliver a much better quality of experience. I think it's getting to the point very quickly now where it's safe to put your toe in the water if you haven't already. And it's probably risky to not be prepared. If one of your competitors adopts an advanced codec and announces an advanced capability, you certainly want to be ready to respond. And in fact, there's a significant advantage of being the first mover and using these great capabilities as a competitive weapon. HEVC was finalized more than 5 years ago, as was VP9. They're very mature. There are many software and hardware implementations, so it's ready to rock and roll. The challenge with advanced codecs is device and browser support. VP9 has pretty good browser support, so for software decoding. But when you need hardware device support, HEVC has quite good, but then it's not the best solution today to stream to a browser unless you insist your customers switch to either Safari or Edge. So it's a bit of a complex topic, but certainly something that everyone should be staying on top of.
Yeah, I agree with that conclusion. And the thing I would like to add to the mix is that, let's just say AVC H.264 is, has the broadest reach, and then using an advanced codec like HEVC sounds good, but when you look at, let's say, the DRM stuff which is related to HEVC and the requirements from the studios, it gets very complicated very soon. It's difficult to decide what is the right one. It depends very much on, let's say, the population you want to reach and the kind of devices they are tending to use and how the future looks like. But for the moment, I would just say AVC and HEVC are the best bet, and all the others are nice, but especially in relation to DRM, it's very complicated.
Well, so this is Torbjorn. Yeah, I will follow up on this. I think it's really important to look at the encryption and DRM if you have content which you need to protect. Because if you need hardware encryption, then the choice is really simple. I mean, then you need to have AVC, HEVC for Apple platforms, and for Google platform, it's basically the Google sort of AVC, VP8, and VP9. So. And then it depends a bit on the use case also, how many codecs that you can have. If you're doing live, it might be costly to have live encoders for both H.264 and VP8 and HEVC and so on. If you're doing VOD, then can do a batch transcoding. The cost might be much more maybe a much less of a problem.
Yeah.
I think this is Thierry speaking. I think, yes, broadcast versus unicast is probably going to be a big differentiator. As you mentioned, unicast, you could, for VOD, have different codec for different device. Unicast live streaming, it's maybe acceptable to simulcast on the network, on an IP network, but for broadcast, we never see any operator pushing two different codecs. So for time being, we see on the broadcast AVC, HEVC for DTT and DTH. And then for Ultra HD, everybody agrees HEVC is the codec to go. So I think the next battle will be what to do with unicast. And we probably spend some time on the AV1 case during this webinar.
All right. So, thinking about that, right? So you guys brought up a lot of interesting considerations to be made when thinking about which codec should I choose. And obviously it's complicated, right? I think that's the gist. This is not sort of come into a meeting room and in 3 minutes your company has figured out which codec to use and everyone goes off and runs and implements it. There are lots of things to consider. One of the things that I kind of want to dive into is a little bit of a bake-off, so to say, right? So are there any trade-offs right? Whether it's performance or quality or complexity of implementation, whatever, between the major codecs. And I'll say major codecs as, HEVC, VP9, and AV1, for example, that companies should be aware of when thinking about selecting a codec, to use for their video library. And then, of course, you can throw JDET in the mix as well, right? So, does that have, better quality, better compression, better performance than some of the others? It seems that every time we turn around, there's a new codec coming out which proposes to be better than the previous one. So are there any real gotchas that you guys can think about for these three codecs that we have in front of us right now that companies should be, really thinking about? And we'll start off with Thierry.
Yeah, well, thank you for the segue, because we will present at NAB results of independent investigation done by a research institute called BCOM. BCOM is a research institute based in France, and they have actually compared AVC, HEVC, AV1, and GVET being the next generation MPEG codec. So maybe we can leave that aside, but of interest is AVC, HEVC, and AV1. And the criteria was among PSNR, VMAF, and some subjective testing. And what comes out of this bake-off is, for obviously HEVC today is better than AVC, but AVC versus HEVC versus AV1, you see that on the subjective side, AV1 seems to be better, but on the objective testing is AV1 is better, subjective testing HEVC is better. So it looks like from a pure video compression point of view, those two codecs seems on par. Now, if you look at the other criteria, which is basically the complexity, as everybody knows, AV1 is way, way more complicated than HEVC. So if we compare both reference models, we have about a factor 100 between the two, meaning AV1 will have a tax, especially for live, where you need to produce in real time. We believe AV1 will be not very adapted for live, but mostly for VOD. So that's what we're going to demonstrate at NAB, and of course, all the companies interested to see the results. We are going to show the video, we are going to show the benchmark, and I think that's one of the first independent research done on the subject.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
But when you talk, okay, but about the trade-offs part, this is Valentijn speaking. Let's just take a very simple example. HEVC and fragmented MP4 was, let's say, released last week by Unified Streaming. And one of the first things we got in support was something very simple. We have HEVC running inside an Edge browser, and we want to encrypt it with PlayReady. That is doable. But then Microsoft has hardware decryption in Edge, only available for an Intel chip, which hasn't been released yet. So we can talk about video compression itself, but in the end, it's about, DRM content and making the whole ecosystem work for you, which is definitely the most difficult aspect, because the encryption is always part of the equation when it comes to compression and codecs. And I think the best way to go forward in selecting a codec should be based on what you want to do with DRM. I think that is the main, the main issue you have to solve before you can choose the right one.
Yeah, so this is Torbjorn speaking. Yeah, it would be actually a very different landscape if everyone stopped using encryption and used watermarking instead, because in that case you could do a lot in software, and then you could possibly decode or use the same codec everywhere. But as long as we don't have that, we'll, as Valentijn said, we need to look into what is supported in a particular platform, and that speaks against AV1 at the moment. But of course, in a couple of years, there will be hardware implementation of AV1 at least in Google devices, and probably in Microsoft devices, and possibly even Apple devices. And at that time, of course, it might be a different answer.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, these are all good points, and the cost of adopting another codec on top of what you do today it's quite substantial cost, right? Everything has to be made to work. It is not just encoding the video into that elementary bit stream. It is, muxing it, packaging it, transporting it, streaming it to the players, device support of every different kind of device in your customer ecosystem, and making that all work flawlessly. So we do need good standards, and good, whether they're formal standards or de facto standards in the industry. And I think AV1 is certainly interesting, and will have some good degree of success with the strong backing of Google and companies like Netflix. There's a lot of enthusiasm in that world, Mozilla and so on. But it's at the very beginning. It's not quite finalized. We're trying to compare it at the same time to HEVC, which was finalized more than 5 years ago. And you see how long it's taken HEVC to really mature, become a practical consideration. It will take AV1 a similar amount of time, as Thierry pointed out, if the complexity is 100x, and certainly there will be optimizations made so that it won't necessarily stay 100x, but even if it's 10x, that's a lot of silicon. That's a complex hardware decoder in mobile SoCs and televisions and so forth. Will every company be willing to speculatively incorporate AV1 decoders in their hardware? A lot of them sort of got burned as they put HEVC, in their product lines, and they were sure everyone was going to switch from AVC to HEVC. And then for a couple of years, that expensive silicon was sitting there lying dormant, unused. And for some, it's still the case that it's mostly lying dormant, unless you happen to be streaming a Netflix HDR movie or an Amazon Video or something. So what, it remains to be seen what kind of announcements we will see from commercial companies worldwide in every part of the ecosystem as to whether AV1 will be a part of their product roadmap. Yes, there are many companies that have announced they're part of the Alliance for Open Media, and they're sitting in a standards body, and they're sitting in meetings. But that's a different thing than committing to the standard in your product roadmap. So over the next few years, as AV1 is finalized and implementations start to become optimized, it will be interesting to see how much traction HEVC gets, and does HEVC become effectively mandatory for every video capable device? And if that's the case, are the benefits of AV1 strong enough to outweigh the substantial cost of adding another codec to your product portfolio?
Maybe, Tom, I would like to make a comment on this device support. I don't know if you know, but today all the set-top boxes are supporting VP9 because people want to access YouTube on their set-top box. So although you might say it's additional cost, it's more of a tick box today. So we believe if YouTube goes AV1, if Apple goes AV1, I don't think the chip guys will have much choice.
Certainly, Google has promoted VP9 in part by saying the high quality versions of YouTube streams will be encoded in VP9. And it can be expected that they'll do the same for AV1, that 4K and HDR content at some point will be available only in AV1 and not in HEVC. So they can use that leverage. They've also told the Android ecosystem that it's essentially a mandatory codec for, hardware decoding. And so yes, if you want to have the best YouTube experience on a device today, you must support VP9, and VP9's achieved some fair degree of device support. I don't think it's quite as good as HEVC. It started a little bit later. But again, every company has to look at the bill of materials and the bottom line cost of a very complex codec and incorporating it. And so it remains to be seen. I haven't really seen any chip companies' product announcements where AV1 shows up on the roadmap.
Yeah, so that, obviously what you guys are talking about are sort of two things, right? Two things that I want to tackle in a couple of different questions. So the first thing I want to tackle is really these decision points that companies need to consider when, or that they should be aware of when thinking about selecting a codec. So a lot of you guys are saying, hey, you've got to kind of add this to your roadmap, this codec to your roadmap, regardless, because your customers, a lot of your content you're delivering is, through YouTube, and YouTube's VP9, and your customers want to watch that, so we're going to have to put it on the chips. But what other kinds of decision points are there for companies to consider when thinking about selecting a codec? Is it really just about distribution, device support? Is it really just about licensing costs? Is it really just about performance? What are some of the and again, it's kind of like, Valentijn and Torbjorn were talking about, is it really about DRM? So what are some of the things that companies need to consider when thinking about the codec to select for their video workflow, or multiple codecs? And let's start off with, go ahead, sorry.
Maybe I can give you the real life example. So in the service provider space, a lot of operators have started to plan for HEVC, and now they see all those letters coming from those patent pool asking for money, and they are really in disarray right now. So they need to find a solution for decreasing the bandwidth on HEVC capable device. So I would say right now what we see in the market is two things. You have the OTT space where you have more flexibility, web browser, software decode. That's one space. And then you have another type of application where you have more hardware device, and those hardware devices cannot be upgraded to any other codec than AVC or HEVC. And for those devices, which is the majority of the streaming, I think I just read that 20% of people are using PC to stream over the top. For all those devices, there's not much choice. And I think this is the problem we have to solve in the short term for the industry. What do we do with those 2 billion HEVC capable devices? And because we are not lawyers, because we are not driving the price of HEVC license, what Harmonic has really come up to as a conclusion is that we have to improve the AVC performance. And this is what we call content-aware encoding. Netflix use that title-based encoding or chunk-based encoding. It's basically how to optimize the ABR delivery using the legacy codecs. And this might not be sexy as HEVC, but it at least shows some performance benefits compared to what we do today. And I just want to break some news here. The Ultra HD Forum, I'm a president of this organization, has agreed to put in the guidelines this content-aware encoding. I'm glad that Beamr and Harmonic will be demonstrating jointly this technology. And just to give you an example, for bandwidth saving on Ultra HD, we can go down from 15 megabits that we do today with HEVC to something like 10 megabits on HEVC UHD. So we can do similar things on HD AVC. And if we do just this simple thing, I think we are going to remove a huge pain from the service providers who have device, as Tom says, dormant in their network.
Anybody else with some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I should follow up on what the Thierry just started there is that in general, I mean, when we speak about codec, I mean, what the standard is defining is the decoder. So you can do a lot of things on the encoder, and typically you see that with each generation of the encoders, they become more and more performant. So after some years, you may do the same quality at half the bit rate. And so in the complexity field is also when we say that we have 100 times more complex AV1 encoder, yeah, that is, we could decrease that complexity down to 10 times and lose some encoding efficiency, and then it might be comparable to AV1 maybe, with well to AVC. So it's a bit hard to compare codecs and just on the acronym level, because it depends a lot on the maturity of the encoding implementation and how much cycles you put into encoding the video. So yes, I think, as Thierry said, that you can do quite a lot with old sort of legacy encoders by being smart.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I think there is more to, how do you say, gain in the old-fashioned AVC. I mean, there are several companies, you know, it's VNova, it's Media Melon, there's many others improving AVC encoding. And I don't think we have seen all of it yet. There is more to be done in that area. And that might be the best bet, because the clear winner is AVC for now. It's a bit difficult to predict the future. It looks like HEVC, but then the MPEG-LA and the royalties come along. Let's see how that works out. But this is really what I see as the future. AVC and HEVC are really the only codecs with the broadest reach. And that sort of defines where you need to go.
Yeah, I think we should point out that for HEVC, certainly we all know the elephant in the room is the patent license hold up. Let's try to find a nice word.
Yeah, hold up is a good word.
That it did not go as smoothly, even though it wasn't perfectly smooth in the era of AVC. There was VC1 from Microsoft, and they were offering reasonable terms, and the AVC patent holders agreed to, most of them pooled their patents in the MPEG-LA pool. Not all of them. There are 4 or 5 notable exceptions to that. Nokia, Broadcom, Qualcomm, a couple more.
Yeah.
But so it wasn't as smooth. It wasn't perfectly smooth, but it was much smoother and overall less costly for devices. Now, device OEMs are looking at a bill per unit that is a significant multiple, maybe 5x or even 10x, what they are paying for AVC. And for these devices, they will still have to license AVC for a number of years. So they're not happy, and they're going to work on that problem, but it's mainly a problem for large device OEMs, and especially the ones who are used to hitting a cap and capping out at just under $10 million a year and paying MPEG-LA $10 million a year. There are multiple pools, each have their own cap. One has not announced a cap, Velos Media, and so those large companies we're certainly frustrated, and there's some hesitation in kind of openly, avidly supporting HEVC. However, they're implementing it. They're putting it in their devices. They're just negotiating, and they're negotiating hard, and there's legal maneuvering and activity going on. There are defensive patent organizations that are collecting fees from lots of subscribers and going after the problem in a fairly substantial way. So what I want to say here is that for HEVC, it should be understood that it's primarily a problem for Samsung and Apple and LG and Sony and HP and Dell and so forth, device OEMs who ship tens of millions, hundreds of millions of devices, but they have the legal teams to handle that problem. And they've, in the meantime, decided to implement HEVC, and they're handling the problem. For content distributors and content services, there's very, very little risk exposure and very little cost. If you look at the MPEG-LA pool, there's zero royalty for content distribution. If you look at HEVC Advanced, they just announced a week ago they've rescinded any royalties, eliminated any royalties for content distribution, with the sole exception of like physical media like ultra high def Blu-ray disc. So for the streaming world, HEVC is not expensive. It's not difficult. It's just a question of, you know, how quickly will HEVC gain critical mass? When will it achieve that critical mass where people say, oh yeah, it's absolutely a must-have. I can see it replacing AVC everywhere. And the big nuclear explosion will happen when Chrome and Firefox eventually relent and allow HEVC to pass through to the device, which is something they used to do, but at some point patched and decided to block. So that will be, ubiquitous web support would be, the really nice thing. But in the meantime, HEVC is streaming into apps on all platforms, right? So if you're a big enough service to have your own app embedded in the television, to Windows 10, to Android, to iOS, HEVC is certainly a very viable alternative. It's completely supported in the Apple ecosystem. All the top Android devices have native HEVC support. It's part of the Android framework, essentially. Certainly trickier to support in Android than it is on iOS.
Yeah.
But it is. I think when you really look at the HEVC patent license situation, it's problematic. It's not nearly as good as we would like, but it's not a game. It's not a showstopper, right?
Yeah.
And what are the costs of adopting a new codec? There are far more costs than patent royalties per device, which are one-time costs. The complexity of implementing it, make everything work end-to-end, they're much greater costs, right? So AV1 may be touted as royalty-free. It is certainly not free to adopt such a complex codec. It's expensive, right? It's going to require a lot of R&D, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of compute power to encode and to decode. And it's not going to be free to implement in devices, even if there aren't patent royalties in the end. It's going to be expensive to implement in devices such a complex decoder.
Yeah.
So maybe Tom. Sorry, Tom, you forgot to mention, when you talk about the nuclear explosion, I was thinking you would talk about Apple in June deciding to support HEVC across all of their devices. And to me, this was a triggering event, and actually we made a survey and saw that by end of 2018, 64% of operators are planning to deploy HEVC on HLS. So for me, Apple is more powerful than Mozilla, with all the respect I have for Mozilla.
Yeah, and I've been in the codec space, licensing codecs, developing codecs for a number of years now. I can tell you that June 5th, 2017 was game-changing, and that the level of interest in HEVC went up almost exponentially. And we're not talking about kicking the tires and thinking about it and being ready in case. We're talking about real deployment plans. So your survey matches what I see in the real world, and we talk to all the top video services and service operators and so forth. HEVC is for real. It's gaining traction. I think what we haven't seen, and we would love to see, is a major, an Apple and Amazon or someone of that scale saying, we love HEVC and it's extremely powerful, and look at the tremendous benefits it brings. Maybe because of the legal discussion going on in the background, the lawyers have advised the marketing people not to, incorporate HEVC as part of their marketing message, when certainly a device OEM like Apple could stand up on stage and say, by the way, all of our phones are twice as efficient now, and you can store twice as much video and photos as well. And so we're not seeing a marketing push. That doesn't mean it's not happening. There's reality, and then there's kind of the marketing side of the world. The reality is it's gaining traction everywhere. It is in almost any device you might want to stream to, any new device. And the reality is it's extremely powerful. It can easily achieve 2x reduction in bitrate or massive increase in the quality of experience. You can easily support 10-bit and HDR. So it's a very, very powerful technology. Doubling your storage capacity isn't a trivial benefit. right, on a phone where, you know, effectively a 256 gigabyte flash memory becomes the equivalent of roughly 500 gigabytes. It's, you know, what would that cost if I had to pay for that flash memory? It would be much, much, much more expensive than whatever it is I paid to implement HEVC. So people have to recognize how powerful these things are. And yeah, it's very easy for everyone to fall back to the least common denominator, say, well, at least I know it works. Oh, good, I've made it work. But what happens when your competitor comes out with just a massively better product or service, and then really starts to market it and use it to great gain? And this happens with every format transition. Just hasn't really happened yet for HEVC. It's kind of a slow, steady ramp up. But I predict that 2018 is going to be a critical year, and I predict that people will start really not just saying, hey, my phone has an AMOLED HDR kind of display, or this PC or monitor or TV is HDR capable, but really when we see streaming services and other video services really tout the benefit of, you know, an advanced experience, then we'll know we're there.
So let me build on that a little bit. You know, as an industry association, you know, obviously I sit in the middle of lots of different companies in the ecosystem. Some of them technology providers, you know, lots of them content owners and distributors, and you know, one of the things I see is that companies seem to be taking kind of a wait and see approach around adopting next gen codecs like HEVC. You know, and Tom, kind of what you just said was a little bit almost like, hey, this is going to happen. You know, how do we reconcile those two things? Is this kind of wait and see attitude that companies are taking detrimental to codec distribution and somebody coming out into the market as kind of like a clear winner? You know, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Let's start with.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So as I mentioned, there are 2 billion devices supporting HEVC in the field today. I think maybe 10 to 20% are really active. And the question for our industry, how do we change that? How do we make HEVC content available to those devices? That's a $1 million question.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we do that?
Content-aware encoding. That's the short-term fix.
Anybody else want to add to that? I mean, this is kind of I mean, you know, at this point in the webinar, I'm actually like excited. I mean, there's been some really good discussion that's leading us down this path of, hey guys, it's probably HEVC. But the issue is there are so many companies out there waffling on actually implementing it. And to Tom's point, it may be because of the cost of implementation versus the expected usage by consumers, right? If I implement it now, it's going to cost me a ton of money and my users aren't really going to use it for 3 years. That's a problem. So I'm curious as to get some opinions from Valentijn and Torbjorn and even Tom some more on this. What do we do, you know, about this kind of approach that companies are taking? How do we get them to embrace HEVC if that's the winner, if that's the clear, like this is one is probably going to win out? How do we get them to embrace it?
Well, embracing. I mean, there's very few cases where you can abandon H.264 EVC. So it's a matter of where can you afford to have two codecs. If you have a VOD service, I think it should be pretty simple to start adding another codec. So, and I think that's what will also happen, that you will see more and more of VOD services, and of course, especially the UHD content to be in HEVC format. For live services, it will take somewhat longer, I think, because, as was said before, you can have for unicast more than one codec, but there's still an extra cost if you have a lot of different TV channels to sort of have the double, or actually the encoding complexity for HEVC is typically 4 times higher than AVC. So the cost for live encoders can be substantial. But it should at least happen for the sort of high quality channels, or that it should start over time to sort of that you will have a shift towards a bigger portion of the video being HEVC or possibly AV1. But it will be a gradual change, I think. I mean, you can change overnight. I mean, Apple also has this automatic transcoding to H.264 when exporting things out of the Apple ecosystem. So you need to always be compatible with AV1 H.264.
Yeah, I think with wait and see is that let's say the adoption of HEVC, let's say, very much depends on how it works with DRM, because many studios require stronger DRM encryption or decryption on devices when you use HDR or HEVC or 10-bit color, whatever you can think of, and that is sort of because that DRM support is not there yet, might be close by the end of this year. That is holding the adoption of HEVC. Yeah, it stops the process because not every device is capable yet, but it might change soon. It's all about the interoperability with DRM, which in the end will sort of enable HEVC for wider adoption. I think that is the biggest
premium content, Valentijn. I think that's a part of it, and I wouldn't want to understate the importance of DRM and all those components of the ecosystem, but there are a lot of services. Let's say I make a video chat app, a WebEx, a GoToMeeting kind of thing, right? I don't need DRM, right? Or I've got user-generated content, or
but then you're fine. Then you're fine. Then you can
security business. Many parts of the video ecosystem world that don't require DRM. I think it's even user video right now. The Galaxy 9 has finally added a feature where and these premium Android smartphones have had native HEVC encoders and decoders in Qualcomm Snapdragons since the 801, and they're on the 845 now. And now on an Android phone, you have the option to go into the settings and say, do I want to use HEVC to encode? And you can turn it on. It's not on by default, same as the iPhones, but you can turn it on. So I think you're going to see, end users, consumers, starting to really become aware that HEVC is a thing and that it's a good thing, and start to actually share HEVC videos with their friends or attempt to share them. And
that's a good thing. But in the end, if as sort of linear TV is moving into OTT on the long term,
yes,
DRM is one of the most important aspects of doing it. The process is sort of supported by DRM, if you will. That means that if you do not solve the DRM part, HEVC will be very popular for, let's say, social media or webinars or whatever you have. But when it comes to true, let's say, Netflix types of services, you need to solve the DRM question. I know many customers who really want to do it, but DRM is holding them back.
Sure. And those premium services who are large enough, they have apps, and they have apps for every platform, and they solve the problem by building a native app, and they handle the DRM inside that app, directly with the hardware OS and so on. Problem solved, right? Not every streaming video service is large enough to say I can create apps for each platform and convince my end users to download and install those apps. Certainly some platforms like TVs, that's hard or impossible. I agree completely that what we need is that crossover to absolutely make it simple for web-based streaming with DRM through to the browser.
And I haven't seen that yet. That's the whole thing. The simple fact that HEVC with DRM doesn't work in an Edge browser on Windows 10 is really hurting a lot of people.
Yeah, so there's constant, continuous improvement in support for HEVC throughout the ecosystem, that is an open question. When will the critical mass build to the point where the dam breaks and we see, you know, the web browser developers add the necessary support for streaming HEVC into the browser?
Yeah, and we might see that by the end of this year, and that will be probably breaking of the dam if you see it like that. But until that time, sorry, continue.
I was going to say, you know, you guys are actually moving on to a track that I want to ask a specific question around. So obviously, right now, I think if you asked people in the industry who have a marginal knowledge of codecs, you were to say, hey, what's HEVC focused on? What's AV1 focused on? You know, what's the marketing spin, right? How are these codecs being positioned in the market? And I think most people would answer around, you know, performance/compression, you know, as it relates to quality. I think the question that's interesting to ask is what's coming next, right? So what do you think are going to be the key technological advancements in codecs, you know, for next gen codecs that people are going to want to glom onto? Is it DRM support? You know, is that the one, or is it something else? I'd be really interested to hear what your guys' thoughts are on sort of the future, the sort of next gen codecs.
Well, this is Torbjorn. I'm still thinking that for natural video, it will be very much about compression and, of course, HDR. I mean, the sort of pixel quality. Other things like, I mean, I was in the MPEG meeting in the even 1990s, so we discussed object-oriented video coding in MPEG-4 and things like that, and that never really took off. So, and I don't see that will happen now either. So, of course, there is other video like computer-generated or game-generated video, which could be compressed in other ways. But for natural video, I think that compression, HDR, I mean, these are still the sort of, and will be the main important features of video codecs. And of course, DRM is something in the ecosystem which is quite important. Watermarking seems to be on the rise as well, but watermarking is relatively independent of the video codec itself.
Well, Jason, maybe just to make aware to everyone, there is a MPEG initiative to produce a codec by 2020 called GVET, Joint Video Expert Team, ITU and MPEG ISO, and this will provide 50% bandwidth reduction, looking at application like VR, 8K, and 6 degrees of freedom for next generation entertainment application. The problem, we are going to run into the same issue as HEVC. You will have companies who have patents, and we will ask exorbitant price on their patents. So for those who don't know, there is a new initiative called Video Compression Industry Forum, which is going to sit next to the MPEG committee and pick and choose what are the profile which could be licensed in a, I would say, a way that is not going to hurt the industry as we see with HEVC today. And for me, after 30 years of dealing with MPEG, this is the first time I see MPEG community, not MPEG standard, MPEG community waking up, learning from the mistake on HEVC, seeing the threat of AOM coming, and deciding to do something this time, as opposed to cry about things. And this could be a turnaround in terms of adoption of a new codec, and especially making it a success, as Leonardo Cariglione has said about HEVC last year. HEVC is a failure. I'm quoting him.
Yeah. No.
So I think there are great technologies. We need to fix the business model. If we don't fix the business model, we will all cry in 1, 3, 5 years.
Yeah, that we are, yeah, then AVC is the only one.
Well, it's a bit old in all respect. we need some upgrade.
Yeah, we can wait.
So go ahead, Tom.
We can wait 15 years and HEVC will be license free as well. So. But it's a long time to wait, of course.
Yeah, it's too long. Yeah.
But Jason, the sweet spot, it looks like from a codec perspective today is Ultra HD, so 2160p60 HDR. This one needs obviously a strong codec like HEVC. I think any other codec like AV1 will not be able to challenge Ultra HD because there's a complete ecosystem, including watermarking and DRM. So I think we are set with HEVC, although people might not like it for Ultra HD. But this is definitely by far much more successful than VR, as you all know. So I think it's a pain, but I don't think there is any replacement for Ultra HD.
Oh.
I love to hear that. I mean, that's two people on this panel. That's 50% of the panel saying it's HEVC. I love it. And actually, that leads me to sort of my final question. We've got about 8 minutes left. And what I want to ask you guys, and this is your turn to sort of speculate. And you can make the disclaimer, this is only my opinion. This does not represent the company that I work for. But I really want to hear what you guys think the codec market, or the codec situation, that's even better. The codec situation is going to look like in, let's say, 3 years. I kind of got a sense of what Tom and Thierry are going to say. But I'd love to hear all four of you sort of chime in on, what you think the codec landscape is going to be in sort of 3 years. And we'll start with Tom and take about, 35, 45 seconds and just give me your speculative insight. And then I'll sort of go down the line of everybody.
Thanks, Jason. I think HEVC will, continue to gain traction steadily. I think there will be most likely further announcements in terms of the patent landscape clearing a little bit and being more reasonable. There's some possibility that patent holders join a common pool and license terms get better. But I think we'll see a steady ramp up. Will we see that critical mass where it crosses over into all the popular browsers? That's kind of the open question, but I think that's likely to happen at some point. I don't know if it'll happen in the next 3 years. AV1 will have some level of success, but AV1, everyone who knows how these things work, including people intimately involved, understand that these things take a great deal of time. So I don't think we'll see AV1 really starting to be a practical option for 3 to 5 years.
All right, Torbjorn.
Well, I think that we will still see a lot of AVC video actually, and there's also, finally now it seems that CMAF is getting somewhat successful with getting the same encryption for both Dash and HLS, so everybody is going the Apple way and using the CBCS, and I think that will cover up a lot of video. Then HEVC will grow, as has been said before. I'm not sure about AV1, but it will also get some attraction. I think, especially I think that Google will push that quite hard. So we will have a mix, I think, and a lot of low resolution video will probably be AVC still, I think.
Thierry.
I think I will be on the same line as Tom, although I do not underestimate, as George Bush would have said, AV1. I think AV1 will be a strong challenger for HEVC, probably very popular on browsers and probably on some connected device. But as I mentioned, when you want to do live, you can't simulcast, so this will be probably limited to VOD for some services. And I still believe HEVC is the strongest of all the codecs. We just need to fix the business model. For me, this whole conversation is all about business models. There's no technology discussion, as Tom said. The standard was defined 5 years ago. So it took us 5 years to realize we have a gem, And if we don't polish it, it will be a piece of stone. So we have to work harder in the industry, and I'm hopeful the industry will realize that we have to work together as opposed to every company try to have their own interest.
Yeah, I'm sort of agreeing. I hope to be in 3 years' time that we see where we see AVC today. So in 3 years' time, HEVC will be the widest adopted codec, and maybe AV1 will be in the position where we see HEVC today. And for the rest, when we look back to the Bush era, there was also Rumsfeld, and he told everybody there are many unknown unknowns. But it is all about focusing on the business. I think that is the bottom line there.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a couple minutes left, but I don't think we can delve into. We have a few questions from the audience, and what I'll do is I'll probably actually email those out to you guys, and if you can just reply to email, I'll shoot them over to the person who asked the question, and we'll get them answered that way. But I want to say thank you very much to the panelists. You guys were absolutely fantastic. This has been a great discussion. I'm going to now post everything on social media that my panelists said HEVC is the way to go, and you should. I promise I will not do that. But again, I think we've given the audience a lot of things to think about in respect to what are some of the decision points they need to consider. Where are some of the technologies going? How does it impact what they're spending now for encoding and decoding, and then what that might impact them in the future. I think they've got a lot of information from this discussion, and I really want to say thank you again to you guys, and thank you to all the audience that we had. You guys were fantastic staying through the whole webinar. This will be posted on our website a little bit later this afternoon, and tomorrow the webinar platform will send out a reminder to everybody that the recorded version is now available, so you can pass it along to colleagues and friends and family and pets and out-of-town strangers and whoever you want to send it to. But again, thank you everybody. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you on our next or subsequent future webinars. Take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Bye.